This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one website platform for entrepreneurs to stand out and succeed online. People these days have strong feelings about Wes Anderson. At this point a household name, he has one of the most recognizable visions out there, and most people, even his haters, have at least one Wes film that they connect with and adore. There are cousins of mine who aren't even into film in that way that consider Life Aquatic to be their favorite film of all time. There are people that think he peaked at Rushmore, that he came alive in Royal Tenenbaums. People like me who had their brains completely split open by Mr. Fox as a child. I even know a few people who think Isle of Dogs is his best, but I won't disclose their names because they don't deserve to be outed for having an opinion like that. His films are gorgeous, hilarious, personal, unique, and most of all wildly entertaining. His reach makes sense. But in recent years, the conversation surrounding his work has become a bit of a touchy one. The French Dispatch, Asteroid City, and now the Phoenician Scheme have all been met with mixed reviews, people claiming that the heart of his early work is completely gone, that he leaned too deep into artifice, that his characters don't sound like people anymore. Those who have jumped ship are accused of never understanding his work to begin with by people who relentlessly defend this new era, but in the defense of those doubters, his work is more challenging and abstract than ever before, and when he loses you narratively, all you're really left with is the style, and to a lot of people the style gets annoying, dare I say, lifeless after a while. But the thing is, you can't say his shtick is getting old or that he's becoming a parody of himself, when really this trilogy of films feels distinct and unified compared to the rest of his filmography. It has started to hit people that he is not going to change anytime soon, and what I'd argue is Wes himself has realized the same thing. And to see where the real change is happening, you have to look at the work a bit closer. Is the work mid, or is it a midlife crisis? I haven't made a standalone video covering any of these new Wes films because I've had a hard time wrapping my brain around them, despite enjoying this new era. Maybe subconsciously I could tell that he wasn't finished, that there was something bigger he was getting at, because it wasn't until I saw the Phoenician Scheme, one I wasn't even that hot on, that feels like the end of this era, or so I assume, that I started to see more clearly what his recent work has all been about. I should note, I am mostly glossing over the Henry Sugar shorts today, as they feel like a separate project altogether, being adapted from Roald Dahl short stories originally. Am I skipping over them because they mess with my own analysis of this being a trilogy? Maybe a little, but they mostly feel irrelevant to the themes he's exploring in his feature-length work. So anyway, I'm gonna get into what this era has meant to me, why it's so fascinating, why it's so frustrating, and maybe in the process you'll come away appreciating these films a bit more. The French Dispatch marks the beginning of this trilogy. It's an anthology composed of 3 short stories originally published in the French Dispatch magazine, which isn't a real publication, to be clear. It's a continuation of his story within a story within a story thing that he had going on in Grand Budapest, but here it's just more upfront about that structure. Instead of hiding a film within the structure is the film. It is ultimately a love letter to journalism, to storytelling, whilst also being the opportunity Wes has been searching for to break himself free from the limitations of traditional narrative, to go nutso with the style. More than anything, it's the first time he's dipped his toes into metamodernism. To many, this film feels devoid of the heart that his others have, because he doesn't really commit to any main character, at least for more than 30 minutes or so. And the point the film arrives at, the thing that connects all these stories, is to most people kind of unsatisfying, in that there isn't one. It's just a love letter. But is it? The film, made clear by the title drop being full screen as opposed to the 4:3 aspect ratio of the rest of the film, with the exception of the widescreen aspect ratio of the second story, is meant to simulate the experience of reading this publication. The order of choices at the top of the film is very deliberate. There's a screen of text that immediately breaks the illusion of watching a film by acknowledging the fact that you're watching a film. There's a single shot that takes place outside of the magazine, which serves as a place for production company credits, the ways in which this film itself was constructed cleverly placed over the construction of the magazine. And then we have the cover page. We're now inside of the work, specifically the work of the editor within the film, Arthur Howitzer Jr., played by Bill Murray, who, like in most of his films, can be read as a stand-in for Anderson himself. The film is less to me a love letter to stories, and more so a love letter to experiencing stories, what it feels like to read these stories, where your mind takes you. Do you see it in color, in black and white? Is it live action? Is it animated? It's also way more than that. It's about the role of artists in society, the relationship between art and the government, artistic legacy, art living outside of the artist. In other words, it's the first time Wes has made a film about his own art, at least this openly. until, you know. The difference here, though, and where this feels most like the first in a trilogy, is in how hesitant, almost scared Wes feels about making a film about his own films. I see this in Howitzer's hesitancy to include certain bits in the final publication. For example, he asks Wilson's character to cut the line, "All grand beauties withhold their deepest secrets," in reference to the city of ennui. He withholds the secret that he withholds secrets, but because this moment ends up in the film itself, he's revealed that he withholds secrets. Are we following here? He doesn't want to be too transparent, but here he is doing it anyway in the only way that he can, through another character editing another character's piece who is actually quoting someone else. But later in the film, Howitzer tells Wright's character that the, quote, best part of the whole thing is a section that includes the line, "seeking something missing, missing something left behind." This scene reads very much like the Canis Lupus scene of French Dispatch, a quiet moment of reflection and mystique that feels like a poetic way of telling you what this whole thing has actually been about. While this line is referring to the two characters bonding as foreigners in the city, to me it reads as a way of describing the feeling of running away from your own life to a new city, chasing the thing that turns out to be in yourself all along. A sort of avoidance clearly felt by Howitzer, our Wes Anderson stand-in, who has spent a life telling stories, running away from Kansas to live in France, not unlike Wes moving from Texas to the south of France in his own life. His career, or stylistic progression, is only upwards, and the French Dispatch, through its more impressionistic approach, is exploring the idea of straying so far away that he's forgotten himself, that he's a foreigner in his own work. If he's reached a point in life where the only thing he can tell stories about is storytelling itself, what are we doing here? And with the work being so identifiable, is the only way for him to express himself anymore to break the form altogether, to go meta? In this film, he doesn't do that yet, but he does kill himself. Keeping in mind that Howitzer dies in the movie, Wes is experimenting with the idea of his work existing and taking on a mind of its own after he's gone, or even while he's still around. More on that in a second. That's about where it ends. Again, this is very much the first in a trilogy that's throwing a lot of these ideas out there. They don't feel that thoroughly explored quite yet. There is a sort of hesitancy about breaking the form, even though he is actively sort of breaking the form already. That's what's so fun about the French Dispatch to me, because in the process, to sell this point, it becomes the most Wes Anderson movie he's ever made, even now in 2025. This movie feels like an explosion of style to me that is, on the surface, what I loved about it off of first viewing. It reads like the last Wes Anderson film, not only because he dies in it, not only because he pays homage to Tati, one of his greatest influences, but most importantly because I really couldn't see where he would go from here. His style is operating at such a high level, and if his work is only meant to get more and more extreme, to quote the final line of the film, what happens next? Asteroid City is the Wes Anderson film that took the discourse surrounding this era to the next level. I'd go as far to say it's when a lot of people jumped ship altogether. While you might consider it the most acclaimed of the bunch, many critics calling it one of the best of that year, the audience rating for it on Google would make you think otherwise. A lot of people hated this thing. Asteroid City is one of those that you either love or you hate. If you thought the French Dispatch was annoyingly meta, this thing takes it to another level entirely. The film is about a junior stargazer space cadet convention happening in Asteroid City that is disrupted by a UFO. Or at least, that's what Google says. Last thing about the Google results for this thing, one of the people also asked questions reads, "What the heck was Asteroid City about?" And I don't think I've ever seen one of these frequently asked questions sound so genuine. But let's figure that out. To zoom out, the film takes place in the 1950s in a television program that is programming a documentary about the making of a theater production called Asteroid City. In that way, it's similar to the French Dispatch in that we exist within the work of the artist, in this case, the work of Conrad Earp, the playwright played by Ed Norton. This is our Wes Anderson stand-in, and weirdly, he also dies in the film, around the same age Wes Anderson was when he wrote the film back in 2020. What's interesting about a play, in a way unlike a magazine, is the fact that after he dies, the work is still very much actively being made. The cast still has to perform. It's a fascinating concept where the themes of grief within his play are directly affecting its performers in real life. This is the only place where I can find an interesting connection between this trilogy and what he was doing with Roald Dahl's short stories, a collaboration with someone who died in 1990. I can only imagine he was asking these questions of if he's doing him right. Could the legacy of Dahl's work be something that Anderson is after? I don't know, but it's something I took into consideration when watching Asteroid City again. Anyway, if you can't tell already, this is in my opinion Wes Anderson's saddest film, especially on a rewatch, because there's a ghostly atmosphere lurking beneath the whole thing. the playwright being dead and all. And he gets there by making it his most transparent film at the same time. I thought a lot about the most recent season of The Rehearsal on this rewatch. There's an episode of The Rehearsal where a pilot is faced with finding a romantic relationship with one of the actors in the show. After several failed attempts, Fielder devises a plan to have the pilot play himself and the actress play herself in an exact replica of his room, in a fictional scene where they have to kiss. It ends up being a success, which poses several questions of where performance ends and real life begins, what performance even is if we're rehearsing real life situations in advance, etc. Jumping back to Asteroid City, Jones Hall's performance as Augie, played in the film by Jason Schwartzman, is obviously heavily informed by his own relationship to Earp's passing, as we'll come to learn. In a way, Earp is speaking to Hall through the work. There's a brief moment, so quick you miss it type thing, where Earp is asked what the film is about, to which he replies, infinity. My interpretation of that is that the play and film, for that matter, are commenting on the way art informs life, which informs art, which informs life, and so on. And this relationship, because art is forever, is forever. It's not answered what or who Earp was inspired by when writing the film before Hall came into the picture, but there's something to say about when Hall auditioned and kissed Earp and how that then informed how Earp would write Augie in the play, intentional or not. We as an audience only know the play that existed after Earp met Hall, so there's no use trying to figure out what it was before then, but after Earp dies, Hall performs the play differently. The play is changed by this, and the work, after Earp is gone, takes on a mind of its own. A detail I love is the car part that falls out and moves around like it's alive early on in the film. A machine that stops working properly and leaves its characters stuck in place, like an actor experiencing grief in the middle of a production and doing the same. As reality begins to cave in on itself, actors are asking, how long do you think they'll keep us here? And for a second, it's unclear if they're talking about the production or the quarantine they're under in the story. Once you tie in this car part responding to the alien when it visits, and the alien being a metaphor for death, because of all the talk about becoming stars when we die and the alien posing the same as the actress in the play, it becomes a bit of a headache to tie it all together. What is and isn't real, that is. This isn't an accidental flaw either. It's the tension that makes the film what it is. It's Hall himself who goes running to the director for help because he still doesn't understand the play. I'd imagine the viewer probably doesn't at that point either. The director's advice is to keep telling the story, and it's only when he gets some air and is faced with the actress who played his dead wife, a scene that was cut from the production, that he understands what he's supposed to do. Keep telling the story. Another detail to note, the hand on the griddle versus Hall smashing the window. Hall's interpretation of this scene during his audition connects the two incidents to the idea of his heart beating quickly because of the sexual tension in that moment in the play. And while he's auditioning and explaining of this, you could say that there's also a lot of sexual tension between Earp and Hall in the room. But I also see these two moments as the actor bridging the gap between reality and fiction, burning his hand on the griddle to prove he physically felt it, and breaking the window to smell flowers, to get some air. The only two true moments of an actor interacting with real outside air, as proven by Asteroid City being a set, are these two moments. If nothing else is real, it is proven that Hall's love for Earp was. It's almost like love triumphs over everything else in the film. Ultimately, the film is, in a sense, Anderson reckoning with his own art and legacy, as though the concept of death is so overwhelming, it overpowers anything he can do through his work. Is he really saying anything about anything at the end of the day? And the film takes an optimistic route with that balcony scene, that through their performance, in acting out Earp's work, Hall is able to see a way through the work. Just keep telling the story, his pictures always turn out. It's a real trust the process moment, which ties in beautifully to the "you can't wake up if you don't fall asleep" line that repeats over and over again before the epilogue. The film arrives in a similar place that it started in, which is why to some it may read as pointless or confusing, but it's not trying to fix anything or arrive at any specific point, because grief isn't something that needs to be fixed. It's something you move through and let happen. It's a concept that transcends the modes of storytelling Wes Anderson is used to, and to capture the force of this, he doesn't adapt, but lets it break the style. Understanding grief is useless. The only way to move forward is to keep telling stories, to foolishly think you can understand it, but knowing that understanding is foolish. That's where I feel the film arrives at. It's profound, but it's also a headache to wrap my head around. That's why Earp's answer of infinity is pretty apt, because art's relationship to life, to death, is a cycle that truly never ends. The film can try to answer how we move forward from this all at once, but for me to actually grasp what Anderson was getting at, I needed to actually see where he would go next, and we see that in. The Phoenician Scheme is Anderson's latest and third in this trilogy. The film is about a powerful businessman named Zsa Corda, played by Benicio del Toro, who, after surviving a brutal airplane crash, appoints his only daughter, who happens to be a nun, as sole heir to his estate. Listen, this does differ from the other two in that it isn't a story within a story within a story, and I wouldn't personally call this meta-modernism, but this theme of death, and specifically legacy, is more prevalent here than it is in either of those others. Other similarities include this protagonist also has his mind set on a project not unlike Earp or Howitzer. The film uses a chapter structure through different shoeboxes that serve as vignettes within the story, and the font choices feel extremely similar to much of those he was using in the other two films. But most importantly, and most directly, Anderson experiments with the idea of existing in between life and death. The film is an obvious homage to the Powell and Pressburger film A Matter of Life and Death, a reference that makes the intent of Phoenician Scheme a bit clearer. That film also starts with a plane crash where our lead, Peter, survives when he wasn't supposed to. What follows is an attempt by members of the Otherworld, aka Heaven, but they intentionally don't refer to it as that very often because of the title's restrictiveness, to bring Peter to the Otherworld where he's supposed to be. But Peter refuses after falling in love with June on Earth. The film, if you can't tell based just off that brief description, is achingly romantic, making the case for love triumphing above all else in the end, a case for being alive. And this is not the only film that goes black and white in the afterlife and color on Earth. Wim Wenders' Wings of Desire is after a similar romanticism of life, but it's A Matter of Life and Death's way of depicting the afterlife as being stuck in time that makes it the more accurate reference. It's why the trial aspects work so well. A trial, for the most part, is based upon concrete events that did happen. There's no growth, nuance, or drama in the afterlife. What happened, what hasn't, can't. Zsa Zsa's motivations at the top of the film don't start as sincere, as they come primarily from a place of wanting to conquer his enemies after he's gone. A narrow-minded, somewhat narcissistic way of going about this process, but it's through his interactions with his investors and connections, and more importantly, his interactions with his daughter, that he realizes how empty his original motives were. How, to find any sort of lasting legacy, he should refocus his priorities on those around him, specifically his family. Should also note, there isn't a representative from the other world that directly communicates with Zsa Zsa on Earth, but there's something to be said about his daughter's connections to God as a nun having some influence on him. The story here, like Wes's approach, has a lot to do with returning to your roots, a return to form, they're calling it. After all, this is his first film in a while to not be a story within a story within a story. He returns to focusing primarily on family relationships, specifically a parent and child one. And while it has been hailed as Anderson's most straightforward film in years, which it is, how it exists within the context of this recent phase of work is pretty complex. If The French Dispatch is about art being a means of outlasting your death, and Asteroid City being the counter-argument for death redefining your art out of your control, The Phoenician Scheme reads like having to make the choice between art and death, but ultimately choosing life. A moving and refreshingly grounded approach for Wes Anderson at this point in his career, but one that makes sense given his role as a father. Unlike Asteroid City, the voice behind The Phoenician Scheme doesn't feel troubled or lost, but content with where it's at. That doesn't make it the better film, clearly. Even after 2 viewings, I find this one a bit clunky and mechanical next to everything else, but I can't sit here and watch it get dismissed as run-of-the-mill Wes, even by myself. It's significantly more joyous than most of what he's made since Grand Budapest. I'd even go as far to say it's his funniest movie. But most of all, to end up back here, in a place that feels familiar, technically breaking his upward trajectory, but with the context of where he went the last few years. That's what makes it so refreshing. It's what makes him one of the most interesting and self-assured filmmakers working today. You gotta understand, he's just gonna keep doing what he does, and you might hate him for that. But to see him work through this existential crisis, to get the movies about my own movies thing out of his system in perhaps the most interesting way anyone's ever done it, within the confines of the style prison he set up for himself, well, to put it simply, it's just been a lot of fun. And you know what? That's all I got. Thanks for watching. Go watch all 3 of these films and form your own opinion, and before you head out. I want to thank this week's sponsor, Squarespace, the all-in-one website platform designed to help you stand out and succeed online. There's a good chance that if you're familiar with Squarespace, you know about their cutting-edge design. Squarespace has a collection of cutting-edge design tools that allow anyone to build a bespoke online presence that perfectly fits their brand or business. They offer a complete library of professionally designed and award-winning website templates. No matter where you start, your website is flexible to what you need with intuitive drag and drop editing, beautiful styling options, unrivaled visual design effects, and more ways to list what you offer with no experience required. Perhaps most importantly though is that you want to get that website seen, and you can thanks to Squarespace's SEO tools. Get discovered fast with integrated Squarespace SEO tools. Every website is optimized to be indexed with meta descriptions, an auto-generated sitemap, and more. So you show up more often on search engines and bring in more of your ideal customers. And personally, I'm a big fan of their video feature. Squarespace makes it super easy to showcase your expertise and engage clients with video content on your website. Upload and organize your videos, create stunning video libraries, and even monetize your content by adding a paywall. Perfect for online courses, exclusive tutorials, and premium workshops. Head to squarespace.com/Karsten to start your free trial, and when you're ready to launch, use offer code Karsten to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.